I felt my daughter's hands on my back before I understood what was happening. Not a steadying touch, not the gentle guide she'd given me 100 times on difficult trails. This was a shove, sudden, violent, deliberate. The world tilted. The cliff edge crumbled beneath my feet, and as I fell backward into nothing, I saw her face, my daughter's face, blank, empty, like I was already a memory she'd decided to forget. My husband's cry was cut short as he tumbled beside me. We hit an outcropping 20 feet down, and the pain was immediate and everywhere. Above us, 2 figures stood silhouetted against the bright mountain sky, watching, waiting. My son-in-law put his arm around my daughter's shoulders, and they both stood perfectly still, like spectators at a play. I tried to move, tried to call out, but my husband's hand found mine in the dirt and blood. His grip was iron strong despite everything. His voice, barely a whisper against my ear, carried a command that stopped my heart. Don't move. Pretend to be dead. So I did. I lay there in the dust and pine needles, tasting blood, feeling my ribs scream with every shallow breath, and I played dead while my daughter and her husband watched from above. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, I heard their voices carry down on the wind. Are you sure? That was my daughter. Her voice sounded different, harder. They're gone. Come on, we need to get back before anyone notices we were gone this long. My son-in-law, practical, efficient, like he'd just finished a chore. Their footsteps faded. The mountain fell silent except for the wind in the pines and my husband's labored breathing beside me. When I was certain they were truly gone, I turned my head to look at him. Blood ran from a gash above his eye. His leg was twisted at an angle that made my stomach turn. But his eyes were sharp and clear and filled with something I couldn't name. Not quite anger, not quite grief. Something colder. Robert, I whispered. What just happened? He stared up at the blue sky for a long moment before he spoke. When he did, his voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with our injuries. I've known for 3 months, he said quietly. I hired a private investigator. The world seemed to stop. Known what? He closed his eyes. Everything, Margaret. I know everything. That was the moment I realized they had made one mistake. They thought we were dead. They thought their secret died with us on that mountainside. But we were alive. Broken, bleeding, barely breathing, but alive. And my husband had just told me he'd been carrying a truth so terrible that it made being pushed off a cliff seem like the smaller tragedy. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand what happened on that mountain, you need to understand the 43 years that came before it. You need to understand who we were, what we built, and why our daughter could look into our eyes and push us toward death without flinching. My name is Margaret Chen, and I am 72 years old. The story I'm about to tell you isn't one of revenge or rage. It's quieter than that, more painful. It's about the moment you realize that the child you raised, the one you would have died for without hesitation, was willing to kill you for something as ordinary as money. I met Robert Chen in 1978 at a community college in San Francisco where we were both taking night classes. I was working 2 jobs, waitressing during the day, cleaning offices at night, trying to save enough to finish my degree. He was a line cook with calloused hands and a quiet determination that drew me to him immediately. We didn't have much. Our first apartment was a studio above a dry cleaners that smelled perpetually of chemicals and pressed shirts. Our furniture came from sidewalks and garage sales. Our wedding was at City Hall with 2 friends as witnesses, followed by dim sum in Chinatown that Robert paid for with carefully saved tips. But we had dreams. God, we had dreams. Robert wanted to open his own restaurant someday. I wanted to be a teacher. We'd lie awake in that narrow bed, the sounds of the city filtering through our thin walls, and plan out our future like it was a sure thing. Like hard work and love were all you needed. We were naive. but we were also right, in a way. It took us 7 years to save enough to open Chen's Kitchen, a small storefront in the Richmond district. Nothing fancy. 20 tables, a kitchen barely big enough for Robert and one assistant, a menu written on a chalkboard Robert's mother had given us. I waited tables while finishing my teaching degree. Robert worked 18-hour days perfecting his recipes, his hands moving with a precision and care that he brought to everything he touched. The restaurant succeeded slowly, steadily. Word of mouth brought customers. Robert's Sichuan beef and hand-pulled noodles brought them back. Within 5 years, we'd paid off our initial loan. Within 10, we'd opened a second location. By the time we'd been married 20 years, we owned 4 restaurants across the Bay Area and had hired managers to run 3 of them while Robert focused on the original location, the one that would always be his heart. Our daughter, Jessica, was born in 1983. She came after 3 miscarriages and 2 years of doctors telling us it might never happen. When I finally held her, red-faced and screaming in the delivery room, I made a promise. I promised her everything, every opportunity I'd never had, every advantage we could give her. I promised that she would never know what it was like to eat rice and soy sauce for dinner, because there was nothing else. That she would never sleep in a room where you could see your breath in winter, that she would have everything. I kept that promise, perhaps too well. Jessica grew up comfortable, not wealthy. We were still immigrants running small businesses, still working 80-hour weeks, but comfortable. She had her own bedroom painted the color she chose. She took piano lessons and ballet classes. She went to good schools. When she wanted to go to the expensive summer camp with her friends, we made it happen. When she needed a car for college, we bought her a reliable used Honda. When she wanted to study abroad in Paris her junior year, we dipped into our retirement savings to pay for it. We told ourselves we were investing in her future. We told ourselves this was what good parents did. We told ourselves she would understand someday the sacrifices we made. But children who never go without sometimes never learn to be grateful. They think comfort is a birthright, not a gift. They think the world owes them ease. Jessica was smart, beautiful, ambitious. She graduated from UC Berkeley with a degree in business. She got a job at a tech startup. She met Derek Chang at a networking event. Handsome, smooth, working in venture capital. They dated for 2 years before he proposed with a ring that cost more than we'd paid for our first car. I should have seen it then. Should have noticed the way Derek looked at our restaurant, calculating its value with his eyes. Should have noticed how often he asked about our portfolio and our assets. Should have noticed that he never asked about our lives, only about what we owned. But I was too happy seeing my daughter happy, too relieved that she'd found someone who seemed stable and ambitious, too caught up in planning the wedding, which Derek's parents insisted on hosting at their club in Atherton. It was a beautiful wedding. Jessica looked like something from a magazine in her dress that cost more than my first year of college tuition. Robert and I wore our best clothes and smiled in the pictures and tried not to feel out of place among Derek's family and friends, who talked about their vacation homes and their investments and their children at Yale and Stanford. We told ourselves it didn't matter. We told ourselves that Derek clearly loved Jessica, and that was what mattered. We told ourselves a lot of things. The first few years of their marriage seemed fine. They bought a house in Palo Alto, a beautiful modern thing with clean lines and more space than 2 people could possibly need. Jessica kept working at her startup. Derek moved to a bigger firm. They invited us over for dinners where Derek would hold court about market trends and tech valuations, while Jessica nodded along, adding her own insights in the language of business I'd never quite learned. I noticed that Jessica called less often, that our weekly lunches became monthly, then occasional, that when I asked about her life, her answers grew shorter, vaguer. But I told myself this was natural. She was building her own life, her own family. This was what we'd wanted for her, wasn't it? Independence, success, a life better than ours. The requests started small. 3 years after the wedding, Jessica called to ask if we might consider selling one of our restaurants. The original location, specifically, the one Robert still ran himself, the one that was his pride. She said the property was valuable, that the neighborhood was gentrifying, that we could sell for far more than what we'd paid. She had investment opportunities, she said, ways to make that money grow faster than a restaurant ever could. Robert said no immediately. That restaurant was his life's work. The thought of selling it to fund his daughter's investment schemes made his jaw tight and his eyes hard. Jessica was disappointed, but she seemed to accept it. For a while. Then came the suggestions that we should think about retirement. We were in our 60s now. Didn't we want to travel? To rest? Didn't we want to enjoy the fruits of our labor instead of working 70-hour weeks? She knew someone who might be interested in buying the restaurant business, all 4 locations for a good price. We could invest the money wisely and live comfortably for the rest of our lives. Again, Robert said no. The restaurants weren't just our income. They were our purpose, our identity, our contribution to the community we'd been part of for 4 decades. We'd hired people who'd worked for us for 20 years. We had customers who came in every week, sometimes multiple times a week, who knew us by name and asked about our lives. We had recipes that Robert had perfected over decades, techniques he still taught to young cooks who wanted to learn. We weren't ready to stop being who we were just because Jessica thought we should. I started to notice something else around this time. At family dinners, Derek would ask pointed questions about our estate planning. Had we updated our will? Did we have a trust? What were our plans for succession? He framed it as concern, as wanting to make sure we were protected and organized. Robert deflected these questions, but I could see them bothering him. One night, after a particularly persistent interrogation from Derek about our retirement accounts and property holdings, Robert was quiet all the way home. "He counts everything," Robert said finally, pulling into our driveway. "Did you notice? Every time we see them, he's adding things up. The restaurants, the house, the savings. He's making an inventory." "Maybe he's just trying to help," I said, but the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Robert looked at me with tired eyes. "Nobody helps that carefully, Margaret." Still, we told ourselves we were being paranoid. These were our children, our family. Yes, they were more interested in money than we'd raised Jessica to be, but that was the world they lived in. Silicon Valley, venture capital. Everything was about value and growth and returns. It didn't mean they were bad people. It didn't mean they didn't love us. We told ourselves this even as the questions became more frequent. Even as Jessica started bringing up our age more often, talking about senior communities, about how dangerous it was for people our age to work such demanding jobs. Even as Derek started mentioning friends of his who could help us liquidate our assets and optimize our portfolio. The shift was so gradual I almost didn't see it. The way Jessica's voice took on an edge of impatience when we declined their suggestions. The way Derek stopped pretending to be interested in anything except our financial situation. The way family dinners became business negotiations with them on one side and us increasingly on the other. But I still believed, in my heart, that underneath all the talk of money and investments and estates, my daughter loved us. That if it came down to it, blood would matter more than dollars. I believed this until 3 months before the mountain. That's when Robert came home early from the restaurant one afternoon, his face ashen, his hands shaking slightly as he set his keys on the kitchen counter. "I need to tell you something," he said. And he told me about the conversation he'd overheard at the restaurant. He'd been in the dry storage room behind shelves of supplies when Jessica and Derek had come in asking for him. The hostess had told them he was in back, and they'd waited near the kitchen door, not realizing Robert was within earshot. Derek's voice had carried clearly. "We need to push harder. They're both over 70. The longer we wait, the more chance something goes wrong. What if they get sick and end up in some facility that eats through everything?" "I know," Jessica's voice, "but they won't listen. Dad's completely unreasonable about the restaurants, and Mom just goes along with whatever he says. Then we need to change tactics, maybe suggest they're not as sharp as they used to be, make the case that they're becoming a liability to their own business, that it would be irresponsible to let them keep running things when they're clearly in decline. You think that would work? We have to make it work. I've run the numbers. If we can liquidate everything within the next year, the restaurants, their house, the savings, and invest it properly, we're looking at 8 to 10 million minimum. That's enough to... Robert had made a noise then, accidentally knocked against a shelf. The conversation had stopped abruptly. When he'd emerged, they'd greeted him like nothing had happened, all smiles and small talk about how well the restaurant was doing. But Robert had heard enough, and he'd heard it in his daughter's voice, clear as day. They weren't waiting for us to die naturally. They were actively planning how to take everything while we were still alive. I didn't want to believe it. Even hearing it from Robert's lips, I wanted to find another explanation. Maybe he'd misunderstood. Maybe they were just worried about us and expressing it badly. Maybe... There's more, Robert said quietly. After that, I needed to know. I needed to understand what we were dealing with, so I hired someone, a private investigator. He'd brought home a file, a thick manila folder that he set on our kitchen table like it weighed 100 pounds. Inside were printed emails, bank statements, text messages that the investigator had somehow obtained legally through digital forensics. I don't understand the technicalities of how they do it, something about data recovery and legal discovery processes, but there it all was, the evidence of our daughter's betrayal, printed in black and white. Jessica and Derek had been planning this for over 2 years. There were spreadsheets detailing our estimated net worth, emails to lawyers asking about conservatorship laws and how to have elderly parents declared mentally incompetent, research into nursing homes that accepted Medicaid, because once they'd taken everything, that's where they planned to put us. There were text messages between them that made my hands shake as I read them. Jessica, they're so fucking stubborn. I don't know why they won't just accept they're too old for this. Derek, because your dad thinks he's still some master chef instead of an old man who could keel over in his kitchen any day. We might need to manufacture a health crisis. Jessica, what do you mean? Derek, I mean, maybe one of them has a fall, breaks a hip. Suddenly they need care they can't provide themselves. Then we can step in as the concerned family members, take over their affairs temporarily, and by the time they recover, if they recover, everything's already transitioned. Jessica, that feels risky. Derek, more risky than waiting until they're 90 and everything's eaten up by medical costs? We need to move soon, Jess. The window is closing. I read those messages 3 times before I understood what they were actually discussing. My daughter, the baby I'd held, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, was discussing with her husband how to arrange for one of us to have an accident so they could steal our life's work. I don't understand, I said finally, my voice breaking. We would have left it all to her anyway. When we died, she'd get everything. Why can't she wait? Robert's face was hard, because waiting means we might spend it on our own medical care, on actually living our lives, on donations or causes we care about. Every day we're alive is another day that money might go somewhere other than her bank account. But we're her parents. No, Margaret. Robert's voice was infinitely sad. We're assets on a spreadsheet. That's all we've been to them for a long time. We just didn't want to see it. I couldn't process it. I sat at that kitchen table and tried to reconcile the smiling girl in our family photos with the woman who'd written those messages. Tried to understand how I'd raise someone capable of this. Robert gave me time. He let me cry, let me rage, let me grieve, because that's what it was, a kind of death. The death of the daughter I'd thought I had, replaced by the stranger who'd actually been there all along. What do we do? I asked finally. Robert closed the folder. We're careful. We don't let them know we know, and we make preparations. What kind of preparations? But Robert wouldn't tell me. Not yet. He said it was better if I didn't know the details, not because he didn't trust me, but because he needed me to act naturally around Jessica and Derek. If they sensed we suspected something, they might accelerate their plans. So I did what he asked. I pretended. When Jessica called suggesting we all take a trip together, a family vacation to the mountains, just the four of us, a chance to reconnect, I said yes, even though my stomach turned at the thought. When she talked about hiking to this beautiful overlook she'd read about, a place with an amazing view where we could take family photos, I smiled and agreed, even though I could read the subtext in every word. Robert squeezed my hand under the table. He was thinking what I was thinking. An isolated mountain trail, a tragic accident, two elderly people who lost their footing and fell. How terribly sad, how sudden. At least they went together, doing something they loved. No one would question it. These things happened to seniors who pushed themselves beyond their physical limits, and their loving daughter and son-in-law would inherit everything, with no suspicion, no investigation. Just sympathy and a clear path to our bank accounts, but we said yes to the trip anyway. Because Robert had a plan, though he still wouldn't tell me what it was. He just kept saying, "Trust me. I need you to trust me." So I did. I trusted my husband of 43 years, the man who'd worked beside me through every hardship, every setback, every triumph. If Robert said he had a plan, then he had a plan. The morning we left for the mountains, I looked around our house like I might never see it again. It's possible I wouldn't have if things had gone differently. This home we'd bought 15 years ago after the restaurants were solidly successful. Nothing extravagant, a modest 3-bedroom in the Sunset District, but it was ours, paid off, filled with 40 years of collected life. I touched the jade plant in the living room window, the one that had been a gift from Robert's mother when we first married. I ran my hand along the back of the couch we'd bought to replace the second-hand one Jessica had spilled grape juice on when she was 7. I looked at the photos on the walls, Jessica's school pictures, her graduation, her wedding, mixed with photos of us at the restaurants, at family celebrations, at moments that had seemed important enough to frame. How many of those smiles had been real? How long had my daughter been looking at us and seeing only obstacles between her and our money? Ready? Robert came down the stairs with our overnight bags. "No," I said honestly, "but let's go anyway." Derek drove. He'd insisted, saying his SUV was better for mountain roads than our sensible sedan. Jessica sat in front with him. Robert and I were in back, hands clasped between us where they couldn't see. The drive took 3 hours. Derek made conversation about real estate values in the area, about some tech executive who'd just bought a compound near Lake Tahoe, about investment opportunities in mountain properties. Jessica added her own observations, talking about vacation rental potential and appreciation rates. They never asked us how we were feeling, never asked if we needed to stop and stretch, if we wanted water or a snack. At 72 and 75, a 3-hour drive isn't nothing. But they weren't thinking about our comfort. They were thinking about what came next. We checked into a bed and breakfast in a small mountain town. Charming place, the kind with handmade quilts and a breakfast room overlooking pine trees. The owner was a friendly woman in her 60s who chatted with us about the area, recommended hikes, told us about the best overlook for sunset photos. "Oh, I know exactly the spot you want," she said when Jessica asked. "Widow's Peak Trail. About 3 miles up, there's an outcropping with a view that'll take your breath away. Not too difficult to hike, though the last bit can be tricky. Watch your footing near the edge." Jessica and Derek exchanged a glance. "Perfect," Derek said. "We'll go tomorrow morning." That night, I barely slept. I lay in the dark of our room at the bed and breakfast, listening to Robert's breathing beside me, wondering if this was our last night together, wondering if my husband's plan, whatever it was, would be enough. Around 2 in the morning, Robert's voice came soft in the darkness. "Margaret, I'm awake. Tomorrow, no matter what happens, you have to trust me completely. Can you do that?" "Yes. Even if it seems like things are going wrong, even if you're scared, you have to follow my lead." I turned to face him in the dark. "Tell me the plan, Robert." "I can't. Not yet. If you know, you might react differently and they'll notice. But I promise you, Margaret, I promise you on everything we've built together, we're not going to die on that mountain, and they're not going to get away with this." His hand found mine in the dark, and we held on to each other until the sun came up. Before I go on, let me say this. If stories like this resonate with you, if you believe quiet strength and truth matter, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Your support keeps these stories alive. The morning was beautiful. That's what I remember most. Clear blue sky, pine-scented air, the kind of crisp mountain morning that makes you grateful to be alive. The irony wasn't lost on me. We started the hike around 9. Derek led, then Jessica, then me, with Robert bringing up the rear. The trail started easy, wide, well-maintained, clearly marked. We passed other hikers going both directions, families with kids, elderly couples like us, people with dogs, all of them out enjoying nature, having no idea they were hiking the same path as two people planning a murder. Derek kept up a steady stream of narration as we climbed. He pointed out trees, birds, interesting rock formations. He was playing the role of attentive son-in-law, creating the image of a lovely family outing, creating witnesses who would remember us all hiking together, smiling, getting along. The trail grew narrower as we climbed, steeper. The other hikers thinned out. By the time we'd been walking for 2 hours, we'd gone 15 minutes without seeing another person. "Not far now," Derek called back. "The outcropping is just around this next bend." My heart was pounding, and not from the exertion. Robert's hand touched my back briefly as we walked. Reassurance, reminder, trust me. We rounded the bend, and there it was, an outcropping of rock jutting out from the mountainside, offering a panoramic view of the valley below. It was breathtaking. It was also clearly dangerous. The edge dropped away sharply, a sheer cliff face that had to be at least 100 feet to the first outcropping below, and another 100 or more to the valley floor. "Wow," Jessica said, walking to the edge. "Too close to the edge. This is incredible. Mom, Dad, come see." We walked forward, slowly. I could feel every muscle in my body tensed, ready for, what, to fight, to run? I was 72 years old with arthritic knees. If they pushed, I would fall. That was simple physics. Derek had positioned himself to my right, slightly behind me. Jessica stood at the edge, beckoning us closer. "Come on, we need to get a picture with this view." Robert stepped up to my left. His presence was solid, grounding. We were a few feet from the edge now, close enough to see the dizzying drop, close enough for what they had planned. "Actually," Robert said, his voice carrying clearly in the mountain air, "before we take pictures, I'd like to discuss something with you both." Derek's eyes narrowed slightly. "Discuss what?" "Your plans for our future." Robert's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Specifically, your plans for our untimely death." The silence that fell was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Jessica turned from the edge, her face a carefully arranged mask of confusion. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the 2 years you've spent planning how to take everything we've built. I'm talking about the emails to lawyers about declaring us incompetent, the spreadsheets calculating our net worth, the discussions about arranging accidents." Robert pulled something from his jacket pocket, his phone. "I'm talking about text messages like the one from Derek saying, 'Maybe one of them has a fall.'" Derek's face had gone pale. "You're confused. The altitude—" "I'm not confused. I've known for 3 months. I hired an investigator. I have copies of everything. Emails, texts, bank records showing how you've been bleeding Jessica's trust fund, the one we set up for her, to cover your gambling debts. Your desperate need to hide your losses from your firm. Your plan to liquidate our assets and disappear into a lifestyle you can't actually afford." Jessica's mask cracked. "You had no right." "I had every right. You're my daughter. I needed to know if what I suspected was true, if you'd really become someone who could look at her own parents and see only dollar signs." "You don't understand," Jessica said, and now her voice was different, harder, the pretense dropping away. "You're sitting on millions while Derek and I are drowning. Do you know what it's like, watching you hoard everything while we struggle?" "You live in $1 million house," I said quietly. It was the first I'd spoken since we reached the outcropping. "You drive luxury cars. You vacation in Europe. And it's not enough." The words burst out of her like they'd been waiting. "It's never enough. Derek's firm expects a certain lifestyle. My friends are all marrying into serious money, and you two are still acting like you're fresh off the boat, counting pennies like we're still poor. You're worth millions, and you won't spend it, won't invest it, won't do anything except hoard it for what? So you can die with full bank accounts? So we can live our lives without you pushing us off a cliff," Robert said evenly. Derek moved then. Fast. His hand came up and I saw the gun before I fully processed what it was. A small black pistol that he must have been carrying concealed. Of course, they'd had a backup plan if we somehow resisted or fought back. "This is unfortunate," Derek said, his smooth voice now showing its true edge. "We'd hoped to make this look accidental, but this works too. Murder-suicide. Elderly man, unstable, paranoid, accusing his loving family of conspiracy. Kills his wife himself. Very sad. His daughter inherits, traumatized but inevitable, and life goes on." He aimed the gun at Robert. "Back up, both of you, to the edge." And that's when it happened exactly as I described at the beginning. Robert and I stepping backward, unwillingly toward the drop, Derek advancing with the gun, Jessica at his side, her face cold and determined, and then the shove. Jessica's hands on my back, Derek pushing Robert, the world tilting, the sickening moment of falling, the impact that drove the air from my lungs and filled my mouth with blood. Lying there, pretending to be dead on Robert's whispered command, watching through slitted eyes as they stood above, confirming our deaths before walking away. And then, when they were gone, Robert telling me he knew. He'd known for 3 months. He'd been preparing. But he hadn't told me the most important part, the part that changed everything, the truth more terrible than the fall. Robert pulled himself to a sitting position with obvious pain, his leg twisted beneath him. He reached into his jacket, the same jacket he'd pulled his phone from earlier, and withdrew something else. Another phone. This one different, smaller, some kind of recording device. "I've been recording for the past 2 hours, he said quietly, his breath labored. "Everything. The hike, the confrontation, them pushing us. I transmitted it live to a secure cloud storage. Even if they came back and took this phone, it wouldn't matter. The evidence exists." My head was spinning, and not just from the fall. "You planned this?" "I planned for every possibility." He shifted, wincing. "In my jacket pocket, there's an emergency beacon. Press the button. It'll bring the Rangers." I found the device with shaking hands, pressed the button like he said. Then I looked at him, my husband of 43 years, and asked the question that was burning through me. "Why didn't you tell me?" Robert's eyes met mine, and in them I saw pain that had nothing to do with broken bones. Because that's not the worst part, Margaret. The investigator found something else, something I didn't put in the file I showed you. My hands went cold. "Jessica isn't actually planning to keep most of the money," Robert continued, his voice almost gentle, like he was trying to spare me even now. The investigator tracked financial records going back further. Jessica and Derek aren't partners. They're not even really married, not in any way that matters. What? Derek is already married, has been for 8 years, to a woman in Singapore. They have 2 children. He married Jessica under a false identity. His real name isn't even Derek Chang. The whole thing is a long con. He identifies wealthy families with a single child, particularly first or second generation immigrants who've built significant wealth. He becomes what they want to see. He marries in, integrates into the family, gains trust, and then, no, the word came out broken, and then he isolates the spouse from their family, convinces them to help him get the inheritance early, promises them a future together. But once the money is secured, he disappears. Jessica won't see a penny. She'll be left holding the bag while he vanishes with everything, probably already building the same con with another family. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She doesn't know. The investigator doesn't think so. She thinks she's in love with him. She thinks they're partners. She has no idea that she's just another mark, just another tool he's using. That was the terrible truth. Our daughter wasn't just trying to kill us for money. She was trying to kill us for a man who was using her, who would betray her the same way she'd betrayed us. She was destroying herself along with us, and she didn't even know it. I started to cry then. Not from the pain of the fall, though that was considerable, from the sheer weight of understanding how completely we'd all been broken. "Why tell me now?" I whispered. "Why not before?" Robert's hand found mine again, just like it had in the darkness last night, just like it had 1,000 times over 43 years. Because you needed to act natural. You needed to not know so you wouldn't look at her differently, so she and Derek wouldn't suspect. And because, his voice broke slightly, because I needed you to still have hope, even if it was false hope, for just a little longer. The sound of voices reached us then, distant but growing closer, the rangers responding to the beacon. Help was coming. Robert squeezed my hand. "They're going to ask what happened. Tell them everything. The investigators will find the recording. Derek and Jessica will be arrested. Everything will come out." And then what? My voice was hollow. We testify against our own daughter? We send her to prison? She pushed us off a cliff, Margaret. To impress a man who's lying to her, to win love from someone who's incapable of it. I looked at my husband through tears and blood. She's still our daughter. She stopped being our daughter when she decided we were worth more dead than alive. The voices grew louder. People were calling, asking if we could hear them, telling us help was coming. I thought about Jessica as a baby, as a toddler learning to walk, her small hand in mine, as a teenager crying over her first heartbreak while I held her and promised her that love would come again, real love, the kind that built you up instead of tearing you down, as a bride, radiant in white, looking at Derek like he was her future. I thought about all the ways I'd failed her, the ways we'd given her everything except the understanding that struggle creates character, that ease creates emptiness. We'd wanted to give her a better life, but we'd forgotten to teach her that better isn't the same as easier, that wealth without work is just numbers in an account, that value comes from what you build, not what you inherit. Or maybe it wasn't our fault at all. Maybe some people are just born with a hollow place inside them that can never be filled, no matter how much love or money or opportunity you pour in. Maybe Jessica was always going to end up here, with or without our mistakes as parents. The rangers reached us. There were 3 of them, moving fast but carefully down the slope. They called out to us, assessed our injuries, radioed for additional help and medical evacuation. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, knelt beside me. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" I looked at Robert. He nodded slightly. Permission, or maybe command, to tell the truth that would destroy what was left of our family. "Our daughter and her husband pushed us off the cliff," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat, matter of fact, like I was reporting the weather instead of attempted murder. "They tried to kill us." The ranger's expression shifted from concern to shock to professional composure in the space of a breath. "Where are they now?" "They left. They think we're dead." The ranger pulled out her radio. "This is Martinez on Widow's Peak Trail. We have 2 victims of assault, possible attempted homicide. Suspects are a male and female mid-30s, may still be in the area, requesting immediate law enforcement response." The other rangers worked on stabilizing us. They were gentle, efficient, asking questions about our pain levels and our injuries while we waited for the medical helicopter. Robert told them about the recording, about the phone in his jacket pocket, about the evidence that proved everything. Within 20 minutes, the mountain was swarming with people. Rangers, police, paramedics. A helicopter landed on a nearby clearing, and they loaded Robert first, his leg carefully splinted, his head injury cleaned and bandaged. Before they took him, he gripped my hand one last time. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it. Don't be sorry for protecting us. Not for that. For Jessica, for not seeing sooner what she was becoming, for not stopping this before it got here. You can't stop someone from becoming who they choose to be," I said. "We gave her everything we had to give. What she did with it, that was her choice." They lifted his stretcher, and then he was gone, the helicopter rising into the clear blue sky with a sound like thunder. They got me stabilized next, though my injuries were less severe than Robert's. Cracked ribs, a concussion, cuts and bruises that made me look like I'd gone 10 rounds with a professional fighter. But nothing broken except my heart. As they loaded me into a second helicopter that had arrived, the ranger, Martinez, crouched beside my stretcher. "Ma'am, I need to ask, did you see which direction your daughter and her husband went when they left?" "Back down the trail, toward the parking area." She nodded. "We have officers at the trailhead now. If they're still in the area, we'll find them." They found them at the bed and breakfast. I learned this later, pieced together from police reports and news coverage and the detective who interviewed me in the hospital. Jessica and Derek had returned to the bed and breakfast, showered, changed clothes, and were in the process of checking out when the police arrived. They'd planned to drive back to the Bay Area, establish their presence at home, and then receive the tragic news that we'd died in a hiking accident. There would have been tears, grief, a funeral. They would have played their parts perfectly. Instead, they were arrested in the parking lot of that charming bed and breakfast with the handmade quilts and friendly owner. The owner who later told reporters that she'd thought they seemed like such a nice family, so close, so loving. Shows you never really know people. The police found everything on Robert's recording: the confrontation, the accusations, the gun, the push. Jessica's voice saying, "You don't understand, you're sitting on millions while Derek and I are drowning." Derek's voice cold and calculated, explaining how murder-suicide would be easier to sell than an accident. They found more than that, too. Once they started digging into Derek's background, the whole house of cards collapsed. His real name was David Chen, no relation to us despite the coincidentally similar surname that had probably helped him seem like a good match for Jessica. He had 3 prior identities they could prove, and probably more they couldn't. 2 other attempted cons that had failed when the families got suspicious. One successful con where an elderly couple in Portland had signed over their assets before dying in what was ruled a gas leak, but now looked considerably more suspicious. David Chen, Derek Chang, whoever he really was a professional. Jessica had been his mark as much as we were. He'd shaped her, isolated her from us, fed her resentment, convinced her that we were the obstacle to their happiness. He'd probably been planning to disappear within months of getting our money, leaving her holding the bag for our murders. The evidence was overwhelming. They were both charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud. Derek, David, faced additional charges from the Portland case that was being reinvestigated. Jessica faced the fact that everything she'd done for a man who never existed. Robert and I spent 3 weeks in the hospital. His leg required surgery. My ribs needed time to heal. But the physical injuries weren't the worst of it. The newspapers ran the story. Local restaurant owners attempt murder for inheritance. The media loved it. Successful immigrant family, dutiful daughter gone wrong, the perfect storm of greed and betrayal. Our phones never stopped ringing. Reporters, friends, customers from the restaurants, people we'd known for decades, shocked and horrified and full of questions we couldn't answer. How long had we known? Had there been signs? How could a daughter do this to her parents? I didn't have answers. I still don't, not really. Jessica and Derek were denied bail. The evidence was too strong, the flight risk too high. They were held in county jail awaiting trial. The prosecutor assigned to the case was a stern woman in her 50s who told us we had an ironclad case. "I've been doing this for 25 years, she said. "I've never seen clearer evidence of premeditated attempted murder. They're going to prison for a very long time. That should have felt like justice. It should have felt like victory. It felt like death. 3 weeks after the incident, I was released from the hospital. Robert would need another week. I went home to our house in the sunset, the house I'd left thinking I might never see again. Everything was exactly as we'd left it. The jade plant in the window, the photos on the walls, Jessica's high school graduation photo smiling down at me from the mantel. I took that photo down. I couldn't look at it anymore. Couldn't reconcile that smiling girl with the woman who'd pushed me off a cliff. Our lawyer called the day after I got home. We needed to make decisions about the restaurants. With both of us in the hospital in recovery, they'd been running on minimal management. Our staff had stepped up, our head chef, our longtime manager, but they needed direction. We needed to decide if we were keeping them, selling them, what we wanted to do. I told him I didn't know. I'd call him back, but I didn't call him back. I sat in our living room for hours, days, looking at the walls and trying to figure out who we were now. We'd built everything for Jessica. The restaurants were supposed to be her inheritance, her legacy, her future. We'd worked ourselves to exhaustion for 40 years so she could have something solid, something real, something that would last. And she'd tried to kill us for it. What was the point now? What was any of it for? Robert came home a week later, on crutches, his leg in a cast up to his hip. He moved slowly through the house, touching things like he was making sure they were real. We didn't talk much those first few days. What was there to say? The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after the incident. We'd both have to testify. The prosecutor wanted to prepare us, to go over our testimony, to make sure we were ready for what the defense would say. The defense. Jessica's lawyer. Because our daughter had a lawyer now, a public defender named Sarah Kim, who was young and earnest, and probably had no idea what she was getting into. That lawyer called our lawyer asking if we'd be willing to meet with Jessica before the trial. Absolutely not, I said immediately. But Robert was quiet. He sat at our kitchen table, the same table where he'd shown me the investigator's file 3 months ago, and he didn't say anything for a long time. "What are you thinking?" I finally asked. "I'm thinking about what you said on the mountain, that she's still our daughter." I was in shock. I wasn't thinking clearly. "Weren't you?" Robert looked at me with tired eyes. "She tried to kill us, Margaret. That's true. But she did it because David Chen spent 2 years manipulating her, feeding her resentment, making her believe we were the problem. Does that excuse what she did? No. But does it mean she's beyond redemption? I don't know. She pushed us off a cliff. She did, and she'll pay for that. She's going to prison. That's not negotiable. But maybe..." He paused, struggling with the words. "Maybe we owe it to ourselves to hear what she has to say, not for her, for us, so we can have some kind of closure." I didn't want closure. I wanted to never think about it again. I wanted to go back in time and undo everything. The marriage to Derek, the gradual pulling away, the moment we'd started losing our daughter to greed and ambition, and a man who'd never been real. But I couldn't do any of that. All I could do was move forward. And maybe Robert was right. Maybe hearing what Jessica had to say would help. Or maybe it would just hurt more. "Okay," I said finally. "We'll meet with her." The meeting was arranged for 2 weeks later at the county jail. We met with the prosecutor first, who advised us that we didn't have to do this, that anything Jessica said could be used in court, but that we should be prepared for manipulation, for blame shifting, for her to say things designed to hurt us or make us doubt ourselves. "She's facing life in prison," the prosecutor said bluntly. "She'll say whatever she thinks might help her case." We signed waivers. We were escorted through security, and then we were sitting in a small, windowless room with gray walls and a metal table, waiting for them to bring in our daughter. When the door opened and Jessica walked in, my breath caught. She looked smaller somehow, thinner. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore an orange jumpsuit that made her look very young and very lost. She wasn't wearing makeup. There were dark circles under her eyes. She looked like the daughter I remembered. Before Derek. Before the money obsession. Before everything went wrong. But then she raised her eyes and looked at us, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Shame. Real, genuine shame. "Mom, Dad," her voice cracked. "Thank you for coming." We sat across from her at the metal table. Her lawyer, Sarah Kim, sat beside her. Our lawyer sat beside us. There was a guard at the door. Everything was official, recorded, documented. This wasn't a family reconciliation. This was a legal proceeding. But it felt, for just a moment, like it might be something more. Jessica started, then stopped. Tried again. "I don't know how to begin. I'm sorry doesn't even start to cover it. What I did was unforgivable. I know that. I'm not here asking for forgiveness. I just wanted a chance to tell you that I know. I understand what I did, what I became." "Do you?" I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "Do you understand that you tried to murder us? That you looked us in the eyes and pushed us off a cliff?" Tears started rolling down Jessica's face. "I do now. I didn't then. Or I did. But I didn't let myself think about it. Derek, David, whoever he is, he made it seem so reasonable, so justified. He'd say things like, 'They've had their lives. They've had their chance. Don't you deserve your chance? Don't you deserve to stop struggling?' And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Why?" Robert's voice was quiet but firm. "Why did you want to believe that we deserved to die?" Jessica was crying openly now. Because I was drowning. Because Derek's gambling debts were crushing us. Because we were living this lie, pretending to be successful when we were actually broke. Because I was so angry at you for not just giving me the money when I asked. It felt so easy. You had it. I needed it. Why wouldn't you just give it to me? "Because it wasn't about the money," I said. "It was about what the money represented. Our life's work, our dignity, our right to live our lives as we chose." I know that now. I didn't then, or I didn't let myself know it. Jessica wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "After they arrested us, after everything came out about Derek, David, after I learned he was already married, that this was all a con, that I was just another mark, I had a lot of time to think, a lot of time to replay everything in my head." She looked down at her hands, cuffed loosely in front of her. "I replayed our whole relationship, Derek and me, and I realized all the little signs I'd ignored. The way he'd show up with expensive gifts but never wanted to talk about where the money came from. The way he'd disappear for days and be vague about business trips. The way he isolated me from you, from my friends, from everyone. The way he'd plant seeds of resentment, subtle digs about how you were controlling, how you didn't trust me to make my own decisions, how you were holding me back." "He was good at his job," Robert said quietly. "He was. And I was the perfect mark. Privileged, spoiled, resentful of my parents for not giving me even more than they already had." Jessica's laugh was bitter. "You know what's funny? The investigator said Derek picked me because I was an only child from a wealthy family. But I wasn't wealthy. You were. I had nothing of my own except what you'd given me, and I resented you for that instead of being grateful." "We gave you everything," I said, and I couldn't keep the pain from my voice. "You gave me everything except understanding that things have value because of the work put into them. You gave me everything except the struggle that would have taught me empathy. You gave me everything except the hardship that would have made me appreciate what I had." Jessica met my eyes. "You wanted to give me a better life than yours. And you did. You gave me a life so easy that I never learned that ease isn't the same as happiness. That comfort isn't the same as fulfillment. That having everything handed to you can turn you into someone who thinks they deserve everything without earning it." Silence filled the room. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Our lawyer made notes on his legal pad. The guard at the door stared straight ahead. "I'm going to plead guilty," Jessica said finally. Sarah advised against it. She thinks we might be able to reduce the charges, argue diminished capacity because of Derek's manipulation. But I don't want to. I want to take responsibility for what I did. I want to stand up in court and say that I tried to kill my parents for money and that there's no excuse for that. Not Derek's manipulation, not my resentment, not anything. Jessica, her lawyer started, but Jessica held up her hand. I need to do this. For them. For me. I need to face what I did without hiding behind excuses. She looked at us again. I know I'm going to prison for a long time. 20 years, probably, maybe more, and I deserve every day of it. But before I go, I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. Not because I think it changes anything, not because I expect forgiveness, just because you deserve to hear it. I'm sorry I became someone who could hurt you. I'm sorry I threw away everything you built to try to get rich quick with a man who never loved me. I'm sorry I was so blind, so selfish, so cruel. I'm sorry I broke your hearts. I'm sorry for all of it. She was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. And I'm sorry that sorry doesn't fix anything, that I can't undo what I did, that you'll carry these scars for the rest of your lives because of me. I'm sorry that the daughter you raised died somewhere along the way and got replaced by someone you don't recognize. I'm sorry you'll never be able to look at me again without remembering that I pushed you off a cliff. I'm sorry I destroyed our family for nothing. I watched my daughter cry and I felt, what? Satisfaction? Vindication? Relief that she finally understood? No. I felt grief. Deep, endless grief for the child I'd lost, the woman she'd become, the family we'd never have again. Robert reached across the table slowly. His hand hovered for a moment over Jessica's cuffed hands. Then he placed it gently on top of them. We forgive you, he said quietly. Jessica's head shot up. What? I said we forgive you. No. Jessica pulled her hands back. No, you can't. I don't want you to. I don't deserve. Forgiveness isn't about deserving, Robert said. It's about letting go. You're our daughter. We love you. We always will. What you did was terrible, unforgivable by any reasonable standard. But we're not reasonable when it comes to you. We never have been. So we forgive you. Not because it changes what happened. Not because it means we trust you or want a relationship with you. Just because we need to, for ourselves. So we can move forward without this hate eating us alive. I stared at my husband. We hadn't discussed this. He hadn't warned me he was going to say this. But as I listened to his words, I realized he was right. The anger was going to kill us if we held on to it. The hatred would poison everything. Jessica would go to prison. That was justice. But forgiveness, that was for us. I forgive you too, I heard myself say. Not because I'm not angry, not because I don't hurt, but because you're my daughter, and I don't know how to stop loving you even after everything. Jessica broke down completely then. Her sobs echoed off the gray walls of that small room. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder. The guard shifted uncomfortably at the door. I'll try to earn it, Jessica said through her tears. However long I'm in prison, I'll try to become someone who deserves your forgiveness, even if it takes the rest of my life. Then make it count, Robert said. Use the time to figure out who you want to be, who you could have been if you'd made better choices. And when you get out, whenever that is, try to be that person. The meeting ended shortly after. There was nothing else to say. Jessica was led back to her cell. We were led back to our car. We drove home in silence, both of us processing what had just happened. That night, Robert sat at our kitchen table with his crutches leaning against the wall beside him. I meant what I said, he told me, about forgiveness. But I also meant what I said about not having a relationship with her. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending this didn't happen. It just means we're not going to let it define the rest of our lives. What does define the rest of our lives? I asked. The restaurants? We built those for her. No. Robert's voice was firm. We built those for us, for our community, for the employees who've been with us for decades, for the customers who've been coming to us for 40 years. Jessica was going to inherit them, but they were never really about her. They were about us doing what we loved, serving food we were proud of, creating something lasting. That doesn't change just because our daughter turned out to be someone we didn't know. He was right. Of course he was right. The restaurants had been our life long before Jessica existed. They would be our life after she went to prison. So we keep going, I said. We keep going. Jessica pleaded guilty to attempted murder. The trial was short, just a formality really, since she wasn't contesting anything. She stood in court and confessed to everything, the planning, the execution, the push. She apologized to the court, to us, to everyone who'd been hurt by her actions. The judge gave her 18 years. With good behavior, she might be out in 12. David, fought his charges. He had an expensive lawyer, hired with money from somewhere we never traced. His trial was longer, more complicated, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recording from Robert's phone, the financial records showing his gambling debts and his con history. Eventually, even his lawyer advised him to take a plea. He got 25 years plus charges from the Portland case that would keep him in prison for the rest of his life. Justice, such as it was. We kept the restaurants, all 4 of them. We hired new managers where we needed them and promoted from within where we could. Robert went back to work as soon as his leg healed enough, though he used a cane now and tired more easily. I helped where I could, though my ribs ached on bad days and I had to be more careful about heavy lifting. But we kept going. Because that's what we'd always done. We'd survived poverty, discrimination, business setbacks, family tragedy. We'd survived this too. Our staff rallied around us. Customers who'd read about the case came in specifically to show support. We got letters from people we'd never met, saying they were inspired by our resilience, by our willingness to forgive, by our decision to keep building instead of giving up. That was the thing about getting pushed off a cliff and surviving. It taught you that falling wasn't the end. Hitting bottom wasn't the end. The end was when you stopped getting back up. Jessica wrote to us from prison, not often, maybe once every few months. Short letters telling us about the classes she was taking, the therapy she was doing, the slow work of becoming someone different. We wrote back, brief responses, careful not to be too warm or too cold. We were navigating new territory, parent and child, but with a canyon between us that might never be fully crossed. Robert revealed the last piece of his plan 6 months after Jessica went to prison. We were having dinner at home, something simple that I'd cooked, and he set down his fork with a thoughtful expression. "I need to tell you the last thing I did," he said, "before the mountain." "What do you mean?" "When I was making preparations, making sure we'd be protected no matter what happened, I did one more thing. I changed our will." I waited. The restaurants, the house, our savings, none of it goes to Jessica anymore. Not when we die, not ever. I set up a trust. When we die, everything gets liquidated and the money goes to a foundation that provides business grants to first-generation immigrants trying to start their own companies, scholarships for their kids, the things we wish we'd had when we were starting out. My breath caught. Robert. I know Jessica will never get anything from us, but someone will. Someone who'll use it to build something real. Someone who'll understand what it cost because they're living it themselves. That's what our life's work should become, not an inheritance for someone who didn't value it, but a legacy for people who will. I reached across the table and took his hand. 43 years of marriage, of building together, of surviving together, of learning, sometimes too late, what really mattered. "That's perfect," I said. "That's exactly what it should be." That's when I understood. Everything they thought they owned was never really theirs. Jessica had thought our money was her inheritance, her birthright, her ticket to an easier life. Derek had thought we were marks, obstacles to remove, assets to liquidate. They'd both been wrong. What we built was never about them. It was about us, about our hands in the dishwater at 3 a.m, about Robert's endless experiments to perfect a sauce, about the regular customers who became friends, about the employees who became family, about creating something from nothing and watching it grow. They could have inherited the results of that work, but they couldn't inherit the work itself, the pride, the purpose, the meaning. Those things weren't transferable. You had to build them yourself. And that was the real tragedy. Not that Jessica went to prison. Not that we'd been hurt, but that Jessica had never learned to build anything herself. We'd given her everything, and in doing so, we'd never taught her that the joy wasn't in having things. It was in creating them. Today, 3 years after the mountain, Robert and I still run our original restaurant. We've sold the other 3 to our managers, people who'd worked for us for decades and who understood what the restaurants meant. We gave them good prices, long payment plans, and our blessing to make the restaurants their own. Chen's Kitchen, though, that one we keep. We go in 4 days a week now instead of 7. We've hired young people, many of them immigrants themselves or children of immigrants, and we teach them what we know. Not just about cooking, but about business, about perseverance, about finding dignity in honest work. Robert's leg never fully healed. He walks with a cane and has good days and bad days. My ribs ache when the weather changes. We both have scars, visible and invisible, from that day on the mountain. But we're alive. We're still here. We're still doing the work we love, still serving our community, still building something that matters. Jessica will be released when she's 54 years old, 12 more years. She writes that she's learning to cook in the prison kitchen, that she's thinking maybe she'll ask if we might consider teaching her the restaurant business when she gets out, that maybe she could work her way up from the bottom, earn her place instead of inheriting it. We'll see. Time has a way of changing people. Maybe she'll be someone different when she's released. Maybe we'll be someone different too. Maybe there's a possibility of reconciliation, of rebuilding something from the ashes of what we lost. Or maybe there isn't. Maybe some things, once broken, stay broken. But that's okay too, because we've learned that you don't need your children's approval to live a meaningful life. You don't need their gratitude to know your work had value. You don't need them to recognize your sacrifices to know that you made them for the right reasons. You just need to keep getting up. Keep doing the work. Keep building something worth building. Our lawyer called last month. The foundation is ready to make its first grants. We'll get to meet the recipients next month. 5 families starting new businesses, 3 students getting scholarships. People we'll never know but whose lives we'll touch in some small way. That's what our life's work becomes now. Not an inheritance for Jessica, but a legacy for people who'll actually use it to build something of their own. And maybe, in some quiet way, that's better. Not what we planned, not what we wanted, but better. I think about that day on the mountain sometimes. The moment of falling, the impact, the pain, the choice Robert and I made to lie still, to play dead, to survive by surrendering to gravity and circumstance. There's a metaphor there somewhere, about letting go, about accepting what you can't control, about understanding that sometimes the only way to survive is to stop fighting and let yourself fall, trusting that there's something to catch you on the way down. For us, what caught us was each other. 43 years of marriage, of partnership, of choosing every single day to keep building together. Jessica didn't push me off that cliff alone. She pushed us both. And in that moment, falling through the air, Robert's hand found mine. Even in the terror and betrayal, even knowing our daughter had just tried to kill us, we fell together. That's what marriage is, I think. Not the romance or the grand gestures or the perfect moments. It's the hand that finds yours in the dark, the voice that whispers to be still, the trust that lets you fall because you know you're not falling alone. Jessica took a lot from us that day, our innocence about who our daughter had become, our physical health, our sense of safety in the world, our ability to look at family photos without feeling pain. But she couldn't take what mattered most: the partnership Robert and I built over 4 decades, the legacy we're creating that's bigger than one ungrateful child, the understanding, hard-won and bitter, that strength isn't never falling. It's getting back up afterward. We got back up, broken, bleeding, scarred, but we got back up, and we're still standing. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven? Would you have walked away? Would you have pressed charges? I don't know if we made the right choices. I don't know if forgiveness was strength or weakness. I don't know if cutting Jessica out of our inheritance was justice or cruelty. I just know that we did what we thought was right, what we could live with, what let us keep getting up in the morning and doing the work we love. And in the end, maybe that's all any of us can do. Make the choices we can live with. Build the lives we can be proud of. Find meaning in the work itself, not in what it might buy or who it might impress. That's the lesson the mountain taught me. Not that children will betray you. Not that love can be twisted into something ugly, but that falling isn't the same as failing. That survival is its own kind of success, that you can be pushed off a cliff and still, somehow, impossibly, find your way back to solid ground. Robert was right when he whispered to me in the dust and blood, "Don't move. Pretend to be dead." Sometimes you survive by surrendering, by lying still, by letting the people who want you dead think they've won. And then, when they walk away, when they think it's over, you open your eyes, you assess the damage, you take inventory of what's broken and what's bruised but still intact, and you get up. You always get up. Because that's what we do. We survivors, we builders, we people who were pushed off cliffs but refuse to let that be the end of our story. We get up and we keep going.